I've been super excited to share this one with you guys. This is a really good one. Two really interesting patients coming up in this one. First patient's mine, second patient's Taylor's. Taylor's an interesting one, retraction, cholesteatoma as well. Really interesting case, that one, potential cholesteatoma. But let's talk about my case, because I loved doing this wax removal. And you know me, I enjoy earwax way too much. But what we've got here is basically, this was a 13-year-old boy, right? Keep that in the back of your mind for the ruler shot at the end. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but just keep that in the back of your mind for the ruler shot. Really lovely kid. He's watched the video as well. He was kind of quite excited to see what came out. Dad came with him as well. Dad was sort of watching what I was doing on my shoulder and filmed a little bit of as well. I'm trying to do all this because I promised him I'd put it up onto YouTube, onto social media. And obviously I can't see who he is, so I've just kind of given a bit of a kind of overview of it. But what we had, he was feeling really blocked up, love him. And he was an absolute trooper. He just sat there and just went through this whole removal, didn't flinch once. He was absolutely brilliant. But what we've got here is this very, very dry front section. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a little bit dry there. Let's use a little bit of suction now on the next piece behind. And what you can see is there's a little bit of movement there. It kind of moved forward slightly and then just stopped. You can actually see the indent of the suction tube on the bottom there, where the wax just went, no way am I having that coming out by suction. So I'm using the right curette in here and sort of gently kind of working my way down. And this was just with a little bit of a cough there. Actually, that's why we flinched at the end. There was a bit of a cough. We just triggered his Arnold's reflex off. But what you'll see here is these sort of smaller pieces that start coming out straight away. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's coming away. It's chipping away. We're getting there. You know, it is coming out. But I look back in at this point. I'm like, you know what? It doesn't really look like I've made any difference to this plug. And then I got another big chunk out, and I was like, yeah, we're kind of still going. And I could see this is start to pull forwards. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I can drop behind the plug now and pull this out. I get as far back as I can see, and a little bit more of a cough. You will see this coming out, but look at this plug coming out, guys. Look at this. Don't forget this is a 13-year-old. Okay, so this is not an adult. Look at that chunk. And there's more in there as well. And you know what? I don't know who was more excited, me, Dad, or the little one who was having it done. But look at the size of that chunk that came out. That's the second half of it. And you can see the eardrum beyond. Absolutely massive chunks of wax. And I thoroughly enjoyed doing this one. The little boy actually got his dad to film the second ear canal because he really wanted to see it coming out. And what I've done here, I just not even bothered with the suction tube. I didn't see there was much point. It didn't really work particularly well on the other side. So we're just going straight in with the right curette here. Little scoop there at the front. And then I'm kind of trying to sort of drop back. And it's difficult, there's not a gap at the top here. So I'm trying to scoop from the right side because I can see that's the thickest, but look at this, watch this, look at this. Absolute beastie on that side as well, real big plug. And then we've got another section which is pulled forwards. Let's try and pull this one around. Oh, it's getting there. Don't forget, guys, if you enjoy the videos, like, heart, share, follow, subscribe for more of this type of videos. If you really like them, become members of the channel. You get to see more videos every single week, 2 days worth, actually. So we're just pulling this section. I'm trying to scoop this section on the right-hand side. You can see I'm trying to get over the top and kind of scoop it around. But it's just not quite at the point where I can drop behind it and pull this through. You know, don't forget it's a 13-year-old ear canal, so it's not massive. There's not huge amounts of space in here, which is always what makes paediatrics a little bit more difficult. Another big chunky section. I've had to sort of stab this one with the right curette to get it up. So we got all that out. Now, you can see there's a little section to the left-hand side, and there's a little bit just at the top of the eardrum here. Now, I'll explain what happens now in this next section. So we go in with a suction. This is the first time we've really kind of got in with suction. We pull that section off, and the patient found that a little bit uncomfortable on this left-hand side, okay? So I did say, well, look, you know, there's one little bit over the top of the eardrum. Are you happy for me to give that a go? And he said, do you mind just trying? but I didn't even get down as far as the eardrum, unfortunately, and the patient found it really uncomfortable. So I said, look, rather than do that, I'll leave that. But look at that hole, 6.5 centimeters of chunky wax on that ear canal, or both ear canals. That was absolutely, I thoroughly enjoyed doing that one, and everyone was really shocked by how much came out, which was it was just a lovely wax removal to do, and he could hear a lot better afterwards. So yeah, he did really, really well for me. So this is actually Taylor's patient. Now, the bit that Taylor said on the kind of little bit of description I've got is that we're looking here at a retracted eardrum and a potential cholesteatoma. Okay, so I'm not so sure which ear canal relates to which, but he's got a very dry piece of wax, a little bit of skin, that lighter material, and at least a little bit of skin there. And we're just going to pull this out. So while I'm waiting for this, if I tell you what a retracted eardrum is, first of all, so a retracted eardrum is basically where the pressure of the air behind the eardrum is lower than the outside air pressure. So it has the effect of drawing the eardrum in. Usually it's a little bit more pronounced at the very top portion of the eardrum, which is known as the pars flaccida, just because that part of the eardrum doesn't have those kind of circumferential and radial fibers in that part, so it's a little bit more flexible. Eardrum itself looks good. Yes, there you go, retraction pocket right at the top. I think Taylor's going in to show you now. So that part of the eardrum that you can see is a lot more flexible up there, so it draws the skin in a little bit. Now, one thing you have to be careful of up here is that when it gets drawn in like this, what you end up with is almost like a C shape, okay? Now, remember I said the skin migrates off, tries to get to the, that forms the canal wall skin. So normally it would come up the eardrum and fold that way. But what it's having to do here is go up into that C shape, come out at the top, and then form the ear canal wall skin from there. What you can get is the potential sometimes as the skin tries to make that turn, sometimes it will almost wrap around itself, especially if you get a little bit of debris or maybe a bit of keratin in there, it'll wrap around, and that's the start of a cholesteatoma. That normally then it will carry on growing and growing and growing. It can cause problems because it can drop behind the eardrum and actually start to erode the middle ear bones. It can go up to the temporal bone, and that can cause massive issues there as well. In very, very extreme cases, you can end up with meningitis because it will hit the meninges and cause all sorts of issues. So it is it's something you really don't want to mess around with. It's something you really need to keep an eye on with those retraction pockets, just to make sure that they are kept nice and clean. That particular one was. Some of the other signs and symptoms you get with cholesteatoma is usually repeated infections and things like that as well. So bearing that in mind, Taylor's clearing away all of these bits of debris here on the outside edge of the ear canal. And what he's got, I can see something already stuck to the roof of the canal. Okay, so I can see that beyond there, that sort of very dark patch. It's an unusual place to get some wax up there. Normally everything's stuck with gravity. It's going to pull it down to the lowest point. So it's normally stuck down there rather than up there. So it's a more unusual place. Let's have a little look. What has he got going on here? You can see it stretches all the way back as well to that particular area of the eardrum that we were talking about earlier. So at this point, obviously I'd be removing this section, but I would be keeping an eye on that, and I'd be saying, well, okay, what is this? Now, the difficulties with cholesteatomas is that they can be a bit like icebergs. What you're seeing is the tip of something that's much, much larger behind the drum itself, okay? So you can be much, much bigger beyond, which means that if you go and try and take that off with microsuction, you could be potentially pulling a much larger object through that section of the eardrum, which is not a good thing to do. So these really have to be removed by ear, nose and throat, because you end up with, or certainly in a hospital setting, you can end up with bleeds and all sorts of problems. Sometimes if they're very small, or you can see it is just debris accumulated in the retraction pocket, you can remove it in clinic here with a suction. But when you look at this, it's not budging. It's absolutely rock solid. You can see he's pulling down the front section. Taylor's just very cautiously trying to pull this down. And you can see how that is filling that retraction pocket. Look at the top, the tip of the hammer bone there. You can see beyond how that's filling that retraction pocket up. So Taylor is very gently just seeing if he can remove this. But that just broke away there. Let's go in a little bit deeper. Yeah, you can see how that's recessed further back. So this may not be a cholesteatoma as such at the moment, but it might be a precursor for one. Yeah, that is rock solid up there. You can see it's almost clipping off the top. It's got that dry. So that could well be yeah, you can see a little flinch from the patient there. To me, that would be, okay, that's enough to do in clinic today. Let's get you in front of an ear, nose and throat consultant. Let's get that removed, because I think that's probably the best thing to do there. Just because if they come away really easily, great. If you've got a bit of resistance or it's causing the patient discomfort, it's not worth taking that risk, guys. It really isn't. And this is where experience comes into play as well, as knowing what's wax and what's potentially not as well. 2 questions for Ask the Audiologist today. So the first one, which is Telwin LK, here you go. Fantastic job, Katie. So obviously referring to a previous video. My question is this: I have a nearly 2-year-old who keeps itching their ears. I can see that wax is moving out, but haven't used anything to help it along. Is there anything I can do? Okay, actually, I'm going to read the second question as well, because they may well be interrelated. So the second question is from Rachel Davis -WN7IR, which says, Taylor, can you explain glue ear, please? Okay, so let's go through these 2 at a time. So 2-year-old, okay, with a very itchy ear, you can see the wax coming out. It's really common in 2-year-olds. You do tend to see the sort of wax. It'll be softer a lot of the time, a little bit runnier, because they're just on the go all the time. And what you get is this kind of a buildup of wax around the outside edge. Just clear that away with a flannel. If you're worried there's something deeper in, you can use a little bit of olive oil in there as well. I know that there's a company called Earol, and they do a paediatric version of the oil. It's designed for infants and much younger children, so it might be worth using that one with them. But the other thing you can get, so with itching ears, there's a really common condition in children called glue ear, okay? So glue ear affects about 1 in 3 children, all right, up until about the age of 8. And it's normally, in most cases, it's short-lived. It occurs for a couple of months and disappears. What glue ear is, imagine your eardrum, and behind that you've got your middle ear space, which is filled with air, and that's where the 3 little bones are found. And connecting that middle ear space to the back of the nose is a tube called a eustachian tube, which in adults stands like this. In children under the age of 8, stands more like that, okay? Now, lining that middle ear space is mucus-producing cells, and they have a really important job. They constantly produce mucus, which drains down through that tube. Because it connects to the back of the nose, what you find is the bacteria is constantly trying to get up the tube, to get into that space. So if you constantly flush the tube with mucus, what happens is it flushes any bacteria down into your gut. So every time we yawn, swallow a tube opens, mucus drains out, air goes in, and everything stays normal, okay? Now, what happens with glue ear is because children's eustachian tubes are a little bit more kind of flatter, a little bit more horizontal in sort of profile, it takes a long time for the fluid to drain out. So what happens is the fluid starts to back up in the system. So it collects behind the eardrum. Now, when the mucus is first produced, it's very thin and runny, but if it stays there for a long time, it becomes thicker, and that's what we refer to as glue ear. And because now you've got a fluid-filled space rather than an air-filled space, when the sound hits the eardrum, normally it pushes against air. It vibrates really easily. When you've got fluid behind it, softer sounds hit it, it's stiff, it can't vibrate, so it doesn't pass softer sounds through. So you end up with a temporary hearing loss while you've got the glue ear as well. So that's what glue ear is. Now, to refer back to the first question, one of the most common signs for glue ear in very younger children who can't express they're not hearing very well is they do this. They pull on their ears a lot, okay? So they're doing this all the time. Almost like our way of trying to pop your ears, they do this, okay? So it's something to watch out for in younger children. So where the first question said the ears are itching, if they're doing this a lot, it might be worth just having an assessment done or speaking to a local GP about probably getting referred in to be assessed for glue ear as well. It's also worth doing it if it can affect things like speech development. The one that I used to use when I worked in the NHS all the time is if my child doesn't really hear, it's difficult because kids don't really tend to listen a lot anyway. But the one thing I would say is the way I would differentiate is, if you're talking to them, they don't seem to respond straight away. Another thing is, if their favourite TV programme comes on, do they straight to it? If they are, then it's more selective hearing. If you open a crisp packet or a packet of sweets somewhere and the child is there straight away, then it's more selective hearing. But if they're really genuinely not responding to those kind of things, it's definitely worth having it checked out. But it is a really common condition, but it is short-lived most of the time. Couple of months it disappears, and by age 8, most kids have grown out of it by that point as well. I hope that answers your questions, guys, for Ask the Audiologist today. And thank you very much if you stuck all the way through to the end. Sorry about my long-winded explanation, but I had to get that information out there. But until next time, guys, as always, take care of yourselves, take care of your ears, and take care of one another. I shall see you for the next video. Bye, everybody.